afternoon and welcome to round 5 of the Virgin Australia Supercars Championship. We're here at Barbagallo Raceway, located 50 kilometres north of Perth, home to the Swan River and pristine beaches and coastline. We've got a big afternoon of action coming your way here on Fox Sports. Supercars will hit the track shortly for practice before we go qualifying. And as the sun sets here in the west, we'll go night racing for the first time ever. Let's get the action underway on track and say a very good afternoon to Matt Nolte in commentary.
Good afternoon, Jess, and good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to a big afternoon here at the Perth Super Night Race. Qualifying to come later on this afternoon, and race number 1 later on tonight when the sun sets, the bright lights take effect. We'll get set for some cool racing. But first up, it's historic touring cars out on the circuit for their first race of 4. Andy Jones alongside me, looking forward to a whole mixture of cars out there, from Jaguars to Chevys to little minis and everything in between. Good afternoon to you, mate.
Very good afternoon to you too, Nolte, and good afternoon to everybody at home. My favourite at the moment is the Volvo. I'm going with the Volvo.
Straight up, okay. Well, watch that one. It's in the field of this race as well. Headed by Aldo Di Paoli in the 96 machine who grabbed pole position yesterday. Gregory Freeman will start on the front row within. The Bondi brothers on the next row. The HQ Monaros locking out 3 and 4. Ken Badger and Graham Wallhouse. Ram Hepburn back to Tony Gilfus. Donald Betts and Stewie Young starting out of position number 10. Like I said, a whole heap of cars in this field dating back to the 60s. I can't stress enough how popular and how well respected this club is over in the west of Australia here. Now, the historic touring cars have been chomping at the bit all season long to be out here at Barbagallo Raceway, and a capacity field of 31 cars ready for blast-off for 10 laps around here. Robert O'Neill starting from the back of the field. He was the car that stopped the session yesterday of the exit of turn 6 at the base, and the view from the Vodafone Mustang safety car as the field weaves its way to the start line. How good are these weather conditions? A little bit chilly last night during that first practice session, but looking for a temperature today in the high 20s, and it should hover around just for the start of the race tonight as well.
We spoke to Thierry Michaud yesterday. He's driving a beautifully presented Chevrolet Corvette, and he summed up this category in that it is all about going and having some fun racing and being able to come back after the racing and chat to each other. And there is that Corvette that I just mentioned with Thierry at the wheel.
On the back with the many XU1 GT Tiranas out in this field here today. They'll have 4 races later in the weekend. Their final race will have a bit of a staggered start between the 2 classes. The NB and NC class, we'll talk about them during the course of 10 laps. There's the number 8 machine. We saw that yesterday, the Jag of Laurie Lapsley out there, position number 21 in this grid that weaves right around the corner. Very historical circuit, isn't it, Barbagallo Raceway, and why not start around the corner like we used to? And
there's the Volvo that I mentioned before of Ken Waller. He's got a bit of work ahead of him to move forward up that field.
28th position. Green flag in the middle of the field. Our hard-working officials and volunteer staff that were here for yesterday, Thursday competition.
Green flag.
But Fast Friday is about to commence with the historic touring cars. 10 laps around Barbagallo Raceway. Expected to be between the 2 guys in the front row. They were trading fastest laps in the shortened qualifying session yesterday. Di Paoli and Freeman on the front row. And we get underway for the first race of the Perth Super Night event here on Fox Sports, and heading down to turn number 1 for the first time. Freeman covers off really defensive on the run into turn number 1. He covers off from the HQ Monaros. The 86 on the outside there of Wallhouse making up 1 or 2 positions. So everybody slides their way out on what would be a fairly cool track. But plenty of rubber laid down on the surface. It was just relayed for the first time since 2004. And everybody survives turn number 1.
And Graham Wallhouse there just doing his bit to fire the Mustang in amongst a couple of Monaros. Split the pack there, which was great round the outside. We know that there's plenty of grip in this new surface, and he's used that very effectively. There we are in the 86, started behind those 2 Monaros.
Big thing for me, AJs will start lapping cars around the half race distance mark. Around 10 seconds separating fastest to slowest around this field here today. The brothers going side by side down towards turn number 7. Change at the front as we come around to complete the first lap. Di Paoli leads and has a big margin, but 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and potentially back to 6 is on as they go back into the rows of 2s as we start the 2nd lap.
And Brian Bondi in that red Monaro's really battling at the moment to get any traction out of those big rear tyres, the Hoosier tyre just not perching into the ground. Now, that could be related to just running some low tyre pressures, making sure you don't overheat the tyre, make sure that they'll go long. It is only a 10-lap race, but you do still factor some of that in. But at the minute, Brian is just battling to get the throttle all the way to that firewall.
It's barely touching the throttle.
There we go again.
There it is again. Same as what we saw at the first turn on the first lap, but now under siege from the big Falcon behind. Covers him off down to turn 6, the basin here at Barbagallo Raceway. Di Paoli's lead at the end of the first lap, 3.6 seconds. They'll have a hard task catching the 96 machine heading down the back straight. Replay of the start, bit of wheel spin from our pole man. But watch the second place car here. He moved right from the left there, if that makes sense, to cover him off.
He didn't need to, though, did he? There was a little bit of wheel spin, but he was still able to get the jump. Paoli led into turn 1, and then I'm sure he'll look in the mirror and think to himself, I'm checking out of here. These guys can race amongst themselves.
Bondi, this is John with our in-car camera down to turn number 1. Now watch his brother just ahead here, snap sideways. He had to brake mid-turn.
And Woolhouse on the outside, you could see his hands very busy on the steering wheel, just searching for grip levels.
No time for fat arming then, was there? Here's the replay. I'm going to use that word all weekend long. Maybe I haven't lived under a rock all my life. That's the change of position. This is where they went back into the rows of 2. Well, there's no argument now. There's plenty of tyre temperature in that 98 machine. Di Paoli snapping sideways using all his sprint car expertise. Using on the road circuit here today at Barbagallo Raceway. His gap is back to 2 seconds with Woolhouse in second place now.
And that is very nicely done in terms of catching the slide. There was not too much correction going on, and the best bit about that for me was as the slide was happening, he was able to time getting on the throttle when the car was straight, all the weight transferred to those 2 rear tyres, and boom, off the corner he goes. That's very well driven.
And fun at the same time.
Yeah, heap of fun for all of us.
So down to turn number 1. It's one of the many Tiranas in the field. Chevy Bel Air also out there, and the Minis. They're just iconic back in the 60s, weren't they? That's the 112 of Onofaro, who runs back in 12th position in the 112. They just nip at the heels of the cars around the corners, but when they get onto that back straight, they're left in the wake of the much faster cars.
And a real art to racing a Mini in a category like this, where you know that your corner speed is your friend, and that's the bit that you're trying to make the most of. And we could just see there 2 very different lines going through turn 1, because if the Mini just sits behind the Tirana through the corners, he'll lose more and more time. By the time they get to the straight, he's just going to drive away from him. So you can see he's just maximising the areas, making sure they don't run into each other. But this is terrific racing.
Jamie Whincup referred to this last night as a racing on a go-kart track with the amount of grip level they got out there. This is the closest thing we've got to a go-kart out there right now, the Mini. Watch this on the replay, down to the basin, and just came in dancing on the tail.
That's actually the right rear that was locked up there. So because of the footprint they have on the road, it just, when the driver turns the car, the weight jacks onto the right front wheel and unloads that rear wheel slightly. So it was actually a rear lockup, not a front, which is not a big deal.
Pan back through the field and look at your top 10. So Di Paoli's lead is hovered between 2 and 3 seconds for most of this race. Here comes Onofaro again in the back of Young. These guys just outside the top 10. Like I said, we're going to see some lap traffic probably in the next couple of laps here. Margin back to last is almost a minute, so expect the O'Neill car to be one of the first cars to go a lap down. How
good is this little battle here? I spoke about Thierry in that Corvette, and he started on the grid beside that Mini that was just ahead of him, and those 2 are battling it out. What sort of a category do you get where a Corvette is racing around with a Mini and having a ball?
It's very cool, and exactly how they were back in the days. I remarked about the West Australian Heritage Touring Cars. Their club over here been really excited about racing here at this event. There goes to 13, and that's coming off of turn number 5. In fact, he's parked in the old pit area. That is, in fact, the old pit lane used back in the initial years of Barbagallo Raceway.
Well, that's taking historic touring car racing to a whole new level. You know what? The cars are from that period. Let's use the pit lane from that period.
Looks
not
cool.
Intentional.
There's, in fact, an old commentary box to the right-hand side of that as well, which gives you probably the best view of Barbagallo Raceway. We'll go back to live shots now. First going through the shot, that's Di Paoli. Here's Woolhouse in the Mustang in second. The Camaro runs in third. Then the 2 HQ Monaros, and still Bondi, I don't know if he's doing this for show now or not.
I highly doubt it, to be honest. I'm sure he's having a ball in there, but from my experience, I would suggest that he wants to be trying to go as fast as he can, and when he's spending that amount of time going sideways, he's dumping a lot of time. Look at this replay here. As soon as he cracks the throttle, he's having to crank on the opposite lock to counteract the rear trying to come around and overtake him. That is not the fast way, but it's certainly fun.
Down the bottom turn, so here we go to the lap cars. That's the 13 limping back to the pit, so he's going to push on here. I hope that's not dropping oil out the back of the 13. Remember, he was the one parked in the pit area on the opposite side of the circuit. Take a look at your leaderboard at the end of the 6th lap. Still Di Paoli with a 3-second lead. We're back in car with John Bondi. The 89 HQ Monaro. This is the re-profile part. They've added a bit of bitumen to the right-hand side there, and I'm glad they've kept that curb. We saw a lot of wheel leaping last night because that is Barbagallo summed up to a T. It
definitely is. We're on board here with John Bondi. We're getting the best view of his brother Brian up ahead, still with massive amounts of sliding going on. John's not going anywhere near him. He doesn't need to be involved in that sort of chaos.
Been out of the basin and up the top. Most of these cars are using a much wider exit down there at the basin. The first categories to use the new surface here. They celebrate their Golden Jubilee back on the March long weekend here this year. 50 years of racing and a lot of events on the most historical tracks we have in the Virgin Australia Supercars Championship. And now we start to encounter some of the slower cars in the closing stages of race number 1, the historic touring cars, part of the Perth Super Night event. And already a nice crowd building around Barbagallo Raceway. Temperatures in the high 20s at this time of the year. We accept it, it's like this most of the time, but if you come across from the East Coast to be here this weekend, I'm watching our coverage on Fox Sports. It really is a great time of the year to be in Perth.
There's a really good battle going on there between Freeman and Woolhouse for position 2. Let's have a look at this replay.
Valiant snapping sideways.
Again, it's not unfamiliar. This is the battle that I was talking about. So we've got Woolhouse on right-hand side of the shot in the Mustang. Freeman in the Camaro on the left of shot. Woolhouse trying to go around the outside of Freeman at the final corner. Wasn't able to get the job done when they arrived at turn 1, and they'll fight on. A little bit of smoke starting to appear from some of these cars, which is catching my eye, and not abnormal out of historic touring car racing to see a little bit of smoke making way. It's just always that question mark on, is it smoke because the cars are old and there's, you know, maintenance is not as high as, say, their supercars counterpart, or is it the sign of something terminal? Hopefully not.
So a quick shot of the 27 Tirana in front of the Ford going through turn number 1. It's Grant Johnson, regular name. We saw him back in the days of V8 Utes. That's a Falcon laying down some big licorice straps out of turn number 1. This will allow Johnson to reel him in as they climb the hill through turn number 4. Down the opposite side towards the basin. With 2 laps to go here, Di Paoli's gap is just under 2 seconds. He's got this race under control. Here's the replay of Badger snapping sideways right in front of Johnson. It's all part of the act.
And compared to the slide that we saw from Di Paoli, look at this. So there's a little bit of overcorrection. The car's continuing to slide. And unfortunately, he had to hesitate getting on the throttle there. Whereas Di Paoli, he was able to commit to the throttle and just punch that car off the corner.
So coming down to start the final lap now in race number 1. Blink and you miss it. 2 seconds from first to second. You're watching Gilfis coming out the final turn. He runs back there in 8th position ahead of Hepburn and Onofaro, the first of the minis inside the top 10. As we start the last lap. 106.6, the fastest lap on the second lap of the race here by Di Paoli. And again, Badger sideways. Johnson was trying to do the same on the exit. Look at this traffic ahead here now. So that's our leader. Now watch behind, because the second place car is right on his tail. Half a second.
Yes, that's Freeman. Di Paoli's been boxed in by the slow traffic going up through turn 4, 5, and on the run down to turn 6, and that's allowed Freeman to catch up. Now, what can Freeman do here? He's certainly having a look.
Came from 2 seconds. It was all about the lap traffic. He pulls out for a look down the back straight for the final time. And Di Paoli, latest of the late breakers. He pinches. The brake goes to the final turn. Is this going to be enough? just gets the car straightened up in time. A nervous moment for Di Paoli, but he picks up the win in race number 1 of the historic touring cars. We both stood back from the screen for a moment because I thought he was heading towards the bunker on the outside at turn 7, but gets the job done by just 9/10 of a second from Freeman and Woolhouse, who finishes in 3rd position and still on for the minor spots here in race number 1. The Tirana diving down the inside of the Mini.
The Valiant still sideways off the final corner.
Nice finish. And Di Paoli, we thought he had that race shot to bits. That's what I remarked at the start of the race. When that lap traffic comes in, anything is possible.
Pardon me, I think that was the Bel Air, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah. What a start for Di Paoli, picking up the win. He was quick in practice and in qualifying, and backs that up with race number 1 on us here today at the Perth Super Night race. Gregory Freeman in 2nd place ahead of Woolhouse. The Bondi brothers in 4th and 5th. Ken Badger in 6th ahead of Jones, Gilfis, Hepburn. And the first of the Minis in Onofaro finishing in position number 10. Back to Young in 12th. Thierry Michaud finishes in 15th ahead of Lance Stannard. Gary Edwards in 19th. And Randall Beavis finishes in 20th. We go back to Dean Wisson. Gallagher back in 23rd. William Schipper back in 27th. And Craig Marsland down there in 30th position. And everybody survived, Andy Jones. So we take a look at the highlights. Race number 1 here today, the first race of the weekend here in Perth.
Aldo Di Paoli, he got a great start from the pole, led everybody through turn 1. There was this great commitment move around the outside by Woolhouse there in the 86 Mustang. We went into this little phase of an expression session during the race where everybody was just doing their best sideways impersonations.
First look from high above there through turn number 5 in the old pits. There's the shorter course that was added here many, many years ago. The brothers going side by side. Wasn't the first time they did that. Heading down towards turn number 7. We'll see some great shots of this shot later on today when the sun disappears over the back of the camera. The 13 spun down there of Rowe into the old pit area. Regained himself to finish down the field in 26th. And that was, I think, the 7th or 8th slide for the 98 Monaro.
I think that was his natural line across the top of the hill. Seemed to happen every lap. There was some really good battles. The Minis, as always, putting on a terrific show. Freeman and Woolhouse, well, they were duking it out, but it was Freeman that was able to drive away from Woolhouse. A little bit of lap traffic came into play. There was this moment here from Di Paoli. He committed so hard. When he locked up that brake, I thought he was off.
Man, we saw him out of our commentary box window and almost speared off towards the sand trap, but he held on to get the win by just 9/10 of a second. Give it to Aldo Di Paoli from Freeman, Woolhouse, and the Bondi brothers, 4th and 5th in race number 1 of the historic touring cars here today. They'll have 3 more races as part of the Perth Super Night event. We look from the Avis drone cam towards the pits. And Jess, it looks good during the daytime, but cannot wait to go racing later on here this afternoon.